President Biden stepping aside and Kamala Harris now the presumptive nominee for the Democrats. Voters like those you just heard from will have a lot of information to digest about the new candidates. Vice President Harris, as we covered earlier, wasted no time at all hitting the campaign trail today in the battleground state of Wisconsin. With the Democratic convention less than a month away, Harris's vetting process for selecting a running mate must happen on an extremely truncated schedule. For more on that, let's turn to 538 Politics podcast host Galen Druke. And Galen, speaking generally, what does Harris have going for her and what's working against her?
I would say the number one thing she has going for her is that age is no longer an issue facing Democrats in this race. Up until now, talking to voters and looking at polls, the biggest vulnerability for Biden was that he was viewed as too old and incompetent. And then the biggest vulnerability for Trump was that he was viewed as corrupt and dangerous. That still holds for Trump, but things have been fully turned upside down for Democrats. When you look at some of the recent polling coming out that shows Harris picking up ground compared with Biden, what you see is that she's picking up support amongst natural Democratic voters, so younger folks, voters of color, women, folks that we would have expected to go strongly for Democrats, but seem to have their enthusiasm depressed a bit by the race matchup that they were looking at. And so I think that's where she is gaining ground. When it comes to some of her challenges, Democrats are still viewed less favorably on the key issues that Americans say are facing the country. And that includes the economy and cost of living, immigration, and then also some issues surrounding crime and safety. And so Harris is part of the current Democratic government, and voters will maybe judge her based on Biden's record as well. How she presents herself on those issues as she reintroduces herself to the country is going to be key in terms of whether she can frustrate some of the negative perceptions that American voters have had about Biden on those issues.
And Vice President Harris, of course, has to hit the ground running, especially in the 6 or so swing states. Is there a world where such a tight schedule actually helps her?
Well, look, I think it really depends on how this all plays out. But one thing it has certainly done, it has basically forced Republicans who will have done years of research, opposition research on Biden, to throw out those books and start over again. And so what we're seeing starting on Sunday, essentially, was new attack lines forming. What kind of campaign is Trump going to run now that his opponent is 20 years younger than him, as opposed to several years older? And so on that dimension, maybe Harris has a bit of an advantage over Biden.
We know that it could take maybe a couple of weeks for Harris to choose a running mate. Historically, do candidates see a bump in polls after making their VP pick?
Historically, yes, but that's also because it comes around the same time as the party convention. And typically we see about a 2-point convention bounce for the parties because those conventions in large part act as big commercials during primetime news. But when it comes to the specific question of does a VP choice, a good VP choice, help you, the most important thing that a VP choice proves to voters is how good of a decision maker you are. And ultimately, voters will shape their opinions of you as a presidential nominee based on how they think about the person you chose as a running mate. So, for example, if Harris picks somebody that folks think is qualified or maybe moderate or maybe closer to their views on the issues, that will impact their views of Harris, and that will make them see her as more, that will make them approve of her as the nominee to a greater extent. The sort of prime example of the reverse happening and doing some harm to the ticket was John McCain in 2008 picking governor of Alaska Sarah Palin because voters didn't think that was a good choice. It actually impacted McCain's approval rating, and voters saw him as doing a worse job.
And the results of a new Reuters Ipsos poll of registered voters was just released a few hours ago. What did you learn from that?
Oh, boy. Yeah, new polls coming out. So first and foremost, take it, put it in the average, wait a couple weeks before we maybe come to any strong conclusions. But what I can say is that there was an Ipsos Reuters poll out a couple weeks ago. And so I like to compare like to like. Because we have something to compare it against, maybe we can learn something about the trend line. And what we see is that 2 weeks ago in the Reuters Ipsos poll, Harris versus Trump was an even match. Today, in this new poll, what we see is that when it's Harris versus Trump, no one else on the ballot, Harris leads by 2. And when you include RFK Jr. and other candidates on the ballot, Harris leads by 4. So what we can at least say, even if other polls are going to come out that show Harris trailing, and in fact, the average of polls today does show Harris trailing, what we can see from that poll is it looks like, based on the news cycle between Sunday and now, that there's an upward trend for Vice President Harris.
538's Galen, Druke, we thank you so much as always.
Thank you.
Joining us now for a deeper dive on the possible machinations going on within the Harris campaign is Democratic strategist Michael Trujillo, who was also Hillary Clinton's senior aide during her 2008 campaign. Michael, thank you so much for coming on the show. You certainly had no shortage of gender bias back in 2008 when Hillary Clinton was running. How are things the same 16 years later for Kamala Harris, and how are they different?
Well, I think in 2008, we got a guy with the middle name Hussein elected president in terms of President Obama. 2016, Hillary Clinton beat Donald Trump by over 2 million votes nationally. So when it comes to Kamala Harris, I think we have the virtues of President Obama and the determination of Hillary Clinton combined. And so I think Kamala Harris is going to prove her mettle in these upcoming days and weeks and show the American people who she is and where she wants to take the country.
How much of a factor do you see Gen Z voters playing in a prospective Harris-Trump matchup?
Have you been on TikTok lately? I mean, if you had asked me what a coconut tree was on Saturday, I would have had no idea what you meant other than something in Hawaii. I mean, Gen Z is coming to play. They're coming in hard. The number of impressions that the Kamala Harris campaign has gotten from TikTok, from Elon Musk's owned Twitter, is historical, monumental. It's the reason why you've seen these past 2 days of historic number of donations going into the Harris campaign, by no part because of Gen Z. It is incredible.
And we know the Harris campaign started the vetting process for potential VP picks: Arizona Senator Mark Kelly, Kentucky Governor Andy Beshear, Pennsylvania Governor Josh Shapiro, and so on. Are you surprised that, at least for now, we're only hearing the names of men?
No, I think, in terms of having a balanced ticket, this is not a shock. Hillary Clinton chose Senator Kane from Virginia in 2016. Joe Biden chose Kamala Harris in 2020. I think having a balanced ticket is the smart thing to do. But this law firm, our old Attorney General Eric Holder, is going to have a tough time, and it's going to be a very short time to have to do the proper vetting necessary for all of the folks that Kamala Harris and her team are considering.
And putting on your strategist hat for a moment, how important is it for a VP pick to hail from a swing state?
It's not critical, but it's nice. And the fact that we are considering Governor Cooper from North Carolina, Governor Shapiro from Pennsylvania, Senator Kelly from Arizona. I mean, not only do they bring a critical state that we put in the Democratic column in terms of the Electoral College, but they're actually all amazing individuals on their own right and have something amazing to offer to the ticket if we're able, if they say yes and Kamala agrees to take them on. And honestly, I think that's what the Trump campaign is most worried about. The fact that we get to have a reset button and really pick a leader from a state that can put Electoral College points in our column that they weren't expecting.
We should know in a short amount of time. Democratic strategist Michael Trujillo, we thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.